There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
This is great to have Ryan from San Jose back. Hello, Ryan.
Hello. Thanks for having me, Sean.
We've just been exchanging weather conditions, and it's really gross. how much of a lovelier day he's having weather-wise than I am. But that's what you get when you live in where I do. And Ryan's here to tell us about his top 9 reads of the year. They are not necessarily published in 2022. Oh, just out of curiosity, were you just being a little rebellious, not having a top 10, or you just didn't have another favorite book?
This is generally what I do every year because I'll post the recap at the end, and then 9 fit in a nice grid. So I just do top 9. I mean, I could probably give you top 15, there's more that I could have talked about, but I thought this was a good number.
You have convinced me of your logic in that number. So fabulous. And let's start with number 9.
Okay, so my number 9 pick is Boys Come First by Foley. I think I talked about this with you a few months ago.
And it's on one of my bite-sized book chats. That's right.
Yeah. And so this is a book that takes place in Detroit, Michigan. And it's about 3 Black friends who are navigating love and life and careers. And they're all gay. So in the beginning, one of the friends breaks up with his boyfriend and moves back to Detroit and reconnects with these 2 friends. And they all have different lives. They have a series of sexual interactions with different people. And so it's very much like a modern romantic comedy, a contemporary look at Detroit. The author, Foley's from Detroit, so he knows it really well. And it's just a really fun book to read.
And I think there's another book on your list that has a little bit of a similar storyline. So I think I know your type of book, at least your type of gay book. Ryan has met the author, and there's a great picture he posted on Instagram, and I'm going to put that on right here.
Yeah, I'm originally from Michigan, and so I was visiting family, and he happened to be in the Detroit area, and so I went to this new bookstore in Royal Oak, Michigan, just north of Detroit city limits. It's a new queer-owned bookstore called Sidetrack Books. So if you're in Michigan, in the area, make sure you check that out. It's a really great little bookstore. It has a great selection, and yeah, it's queer-owned, so that's exciting.
Remind me, I think that I remember that Boys Come First is a debut.
He's written 2 nonfiction books. But this is his fiction debut.
And he comes from kind of a healthcare background, I remember now.
No. That's somebody else.
That's somebody else? Okay.
He actually works for PBS NewsHour.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and lives in New York, I think. I think that's what I remember.
And I'm going to stop trying to remember because I'm just remembering incorrectly. It's just welcome to my world. Yeah, that sounds really good. What's your number 8 pick?
My number 8 book is Tell Me How to Be by Neel Patel. This is a book about an Indian American family living in the Midwest of the United States. The main character is living in LA and has some issues, breaks up with his boyfriend and moves back to Illinois, all while his mother is in the process of selling their childhood home. The book alternates between the main character's point of view and the mom's point of view. And it kind of goes back and forth, and both of them have secrets that they're keeping from each other and from the family. I thought it was just a really lovely read, especially from the mom's point of view, about life after, you lose your husband and loves that you may have missed. I thought it was beautiful, and the way the stories came together was really well done.
It sounds like quite an emotional read.
It is a bit. I think it's a little restrained because they're not aware of their feelings. they're doing things that they don't understand why they're doing them. And because it's about family secrets, they're holding back a bit. And so there is this kind of distance with the characters. It's not a really dramatic read. It's not a really dramatic plot, but it is emotionally resonant at the end. And I think a lot of people will connect with it.
And so now I'm going to hazard a guess. It's quite a character-driven novel.
Yes, definitely based on these two characters.
Great. And is it a debut?
I believe it is a debut.
As I'd never heard of him before. So I'm going to pause our countdown here and ask you, what draws you to debuts? Or is it, am I making a wrong conclusion that you're drawn to debuts?
You know, normally I wouldn't just pick a novel because it's a debut. In fact, I think, debuts can be problematic because sometimes they're not as, the writer's just not as strong. It's their first book, their first time out. There can be a lot of issues. There's a number of debut novels, I think, that you can tell they're a debut because they throw everything but the kitchen sink into the plot. Sure. But I think it's important to balance that because with these books, you have all Black characters, Indian American characters. They're not going to have a full repertoire of books represented. The world has prevented them from publishing queer books by people of color for so long that you're going to have a lot of debuts. So I think that's just what we saw this year. A lot of different perspectives in first novels.
Yes. And I think that the debuts, despite certain shortcomings that are maybe rather characteristic of a debut, there's also often just a freshness of voice that's just lovely. And then just to encourage that and then follow that through subsequent books is a joy as a reader.
Right. And if somebody doesn't have success with their debut, they might not publish a second one. And so it's important to support debuts, even if they're not perfect, especially if they're from unrepresented communities in the publishing industry.
To tie a bow around this little debut side conversation, how many of the books on your list are debuts?
Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think. About half.
Just over about half. So yeah. Interesting. So that's great. What's your number 7 pick? This is a backlist book.
Yes, number 7 is Edinburgh by Alexander Chee. This was published about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And I hadn't read it. I think I got the book on sale on my Kindle or something. And I just kind of put it off. It's about sexual abuse in a small town in Maine among kids in a choir. And that sounded really rough to me. And I didn't really want to read that. But I keep seeing Alexander Chee and seeing people rave about him. And I follow him on social media, and he's just such an interesting author. I'm like, I have to read this. So it was so compelling. It is a tough subject matter, but it is really beautifully written and has this really excellent symbolism that runs through it that I was really impressed by. And this was a debut novel as well. And he's published since. Yeah. He's published since, I think 2 more books. Yeah. But yeah, this one blew me away and I was really impressed by it.
Have you encountered other readers in your travels that had the opposite reaction to this book? Because I have. I haven't read it, but I have encountered other readers that hated it.
Oh, I mean, I haven't, but it's been 10 years now.
Yeah.
The people I've interacted with it loved it. It was like one of their favorites of all time kind of thing. I don't know if it's for everybody because of the subject matter. Sure. But I think probably the heat of the initial launch has worn down. So I'm not hearing about it as much, which I also like, because I don't want to go into a book with preconceived notions.
That's right.
So it's nice that it's not a buzzy book.
I'm assuming, but I'm just going to check out my assumption because I've made quite a few wrong ones so far in this chat, that the subject matter of the child sexual abuse is not treated kind of gratuitously, or that it is shedding some light. It handles that topic, that theme quite well.
Yeah, it doesn't go into like graphic details about it.
Right.
You clearly know what's happening, but it's more about the interaction between the main character, Fee, who is Asian American, growing up in a small town in Maine, and his friends kind of dealing with that.
Yeah.
And I think, without giving away too much, that stuff only happens in the beginning, and then it's more the effects of it.
The aftermath. Yeah. Certainly, sadly, it's perpetually a timely topic. Yeah. And if it's a literary treatment that's done well, it certainly is a valuable text. Number 6, I think, is a debut, or at least I'd never heard of the author until this book came out this year.
Yeah, it is a debut novel. It's Greenland by David Santos Donaldson. This is a book that is about E.M. Forster's first lover, male lover, an Egyptian named Mohammed. The main character, Kip, is trying to write a novel about E.M. Forster and keeps getting shot down by the publisher. So then he decides to write it from Mohammed's point of view, and then it kind of takes off. So the chapters alternate between the book from Mohammed's point of view and then Kip's storyline as he's dealing with his relationships and publishing and different things in present day.
So if we encounter E.M. Forster at all in this book, it's from the perspective of Mohammed in his sections.
Yes, that's correct.
Oh. So we're getting his version of Mohammed's story, and then there's also other chapters that are just about Kip himself.
Yes. So he's trying to publish this novel, and he's having some difficulty. He also has, I think he's married, and he's also got relationship issues, and is kind of trying to find himself, like, while publishing this novel.
Gay married or straight married?
Gay married.
Oh, okay, married. Okay.
Yeah. So Mohammed's kind of like an inspiration, a muse for Kip in his life. He kind of comes to him, and he's drawn to the story from Mohammed's point of view that you normally don't get when you talk about E.M. Forster. And then that has him re-examine his own life.
What can you tell us about the author, David Santos? Is it Robertson?
Donaldson. Because of COVID and stuff, I wasn't able to meet him when he was out in San Francisco. But he did send me a signed book, which was really great. This is his debut. I think he lives in New York City.
Born in the Bahamas.
Yes.
So he is is it still modern parlance to say that he's a writer of color?
I would think so, yeah.
A black writer? Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know if I knew that before. And this one seems a little bit different, perhaps a little more literary than some of your other choices. So why did you like this?
I really like books about E.M. Forster. There's been a lot lately. Alec came out, which was kind of about the other story in Morris. There was a book a few years ago, but the movie just came out, My Policeman, with Harry Styles, and that's loosely based on E.M. Forster's relationship.
Yes.
So E.M. Forster is just such an interesting character. Like, he's queer. He writes not overtly queer fiction, but it's definitely like known that he's a queer writer. His book Morris was written in like 1910s.
Or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, but not published until after his death.
Right.
So it's just kind of this tragic story. He was married to a woman, but had relationships with men. And then the book also has a really interesting structure, because I really liked that this told Mohammed's point of view, But it also has this story about Kip that I really liked.
Well, I've been very curious about that one, so that is awesome. And how about number 5? Let's go to Canada, shall we?
Yes. Number 5 is The Sleeping Car Porter by Suzette Mayr. This book won the 2022 Giller Prize, which is, I think, the highest literary prize in Canada.
One of them, definitely. It is.
A huge achievement. I think this is not her debut. She's written a number of other books, but I haven't heard of her. The Sleeping Car Porter is kind of a historical novel about train porters in the early 20th century.
Yes.
Who are predominantly Black, and they travel across the country taking care of the white passengers on these trains. This one takes place on the transcontinental train from Montreal to Vancouver. And this almost reads like a thriller, like a psychological thriller in a way, because the main character, he's working on a train, trying to save money to go to dental school. And, this is like kind of his last big ride before he gets enough money to go to dental school. If something happens, he could get kicked off the train at any point along the route.
What do you mean if something happens? For example, what?
Well, his supervisor's white, and all the porters are Black. And they operate on a merit system, so he could get a demerit. And if he gets enough demerits from his white supervisor, he could get removed from the train. It could be he didn't tuck in the sheets correctly. He spilled wine on a passenger. Like it's all kinds of things. So it becomes perilous. You really worry for him because anything could go wrong on this train. And at the same time, he's not sleeping because he has to be awake while the other passengers are sleeping in case they need anything. Yeah. And there are other porters that they can take turns, but he's not sleeping well. And then these white passengers are awful. They're ridiculous people.
White Canadians usually are.
Well, it's just, they have money. They're traveling across country. They're so needy. They want all this stuff. And so it becomes quite thrilling because you're like, is he going to make it? How is he surviving on such little sleep to make it across the country? I thought it was brilliant, and I really liked it.
And also he's gay, right?
Yes, he is gay, and he's closeted, but kind of aware of his sexuality. At one point, he finds a postcard in the bathroom that has like 2 men having sex, or 2 naked men, that he keeps, which he should turn in. So that becomes kind of a Chekhov's gun throughout the novel. Like, will he get caught with this postcard? Yeah.
Oh my God, you're totally selling me a book from my own country.
Yep. It's great. It's very Canadian. Like it does a great job, like showing the route through Canada. We don't get a lot of Canadian authors, I think, in the United States about Canada. I've read a few Canadian authors, and they seem to have moved to like LA or New York and written about Americans, but
and it's set. I just looked it up. It's set in 1929.
Okay.
So very important year in the history of the 20th century. Yep, it's before the year of the stock market crash and all that stuff. So.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, and I didn't know the history of these porters. I didn't. Yeah. I didn't know that George Pullman, who invented the Pullman car, made it a point after the American Civil War to start hiring Black men to work as porters. And in some ways, he's given credit as creating a Black middle class. They found careers as porters on these trains, and some of them did very well. But this book shows that it wasn't easy, and it wasn't without racism still.
Yes, and if I didn't mention it before, Suzette Mayr is a Calgary. She lives in Calgary, which is the adjoining Alberta, the adjoining province to Saskatchewan, and she is a queer Black writer herself. So, yeah.
It's a great novel. I hope more people check it out.
How about your number? Oh, I want to hear what you thought about this one. Obviously, if it's number 4, you thought quite highly of it. Number 4, what's your number 4 pick?
Number 4 is Trust by Hernan Diaz.
Yeah.
I like books that have an interesting structure. I really am drawn to books that really experiment with structure and how it's written. For example, like Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell.
Mm-hmm.
Even like Greenland, that we talked about earlier, that has like a different structure between the alternating points of view. This one, I saw him in San Francisco at a book event, and he talked about his book. And I don't know if I would have picked it up if I didn't hear him talk about it. But what this book is 4 sections, and each is a different style. And the first is just like a novel, just like a straight up novel within a novel about this American business tycoon who makes a lot of money and survives the stock market crash. And then there is a memoir from that person's point of view. And then there's a journal written by his wife. And then there's a section that's like more journalistic at the end. I think I got those in the right order. Forgive me.
So they are sequential. You don't go from one point of view to the other. It's this section and then this section, the 4 sections.
Right.
Yeah.
And so as you read these, it can be challenging. The first section, I think, was the most challenging for me because I was like, what is going on? Like, why do I care? So you really have to like either invest in the whole book, or, if it's not for you, it's not for you. I really liked how the sections fit together. I thought by the end it was brilliant. I love the way it was done. And I liked what the book said about trust. Can you trust what you read? Can you trust what you're told? Different sources and different points of view. It was phenomenal.
And it has quite a bit of, it is quite thematically concerned with economics and capitalism. Is that right?
Yeah, a lot. Yeah. I mean, the main character is kind of like a JP Morgan, Rockefeller, Carnegie type guy who almost could have been like an Ayn Rand character. Like, he's not the nicest guy. He made a lot of money, and he wants to protect his legacy. And so it's very much about economics. And when I saw Hernan Diaz speaking, he talked about how he went into a lot of these, like this research on just finance in the early 20th century to see like what happened with the stock market crash and the Great Depression and these tycoons and monopolies and things.
And I did a bite-sized chat with another reader about this book, and what I took away from that was that those big kind of socioeconomic themes are explored, but they're explored through, fully realized characters. Would you agree with that?
It's hard to say fully realized because for me, the first section's a novel and it's written as fiction. Yeah. And in some ways, those are fully realized characters, but yet they're not true characters. It was written from a point of view. And so there is this contrast between like these characters that are, there's different portrayals of these characters through the novel, and they're conflicting. So they are fully realized. It is well done. Like you really get in their head, but then in the next section, all that might be changed because it contradicts itself.
No, that sounds fascinating. Now, I read. Do you know? Are you aware of the the other fabulous queer Instagrammer, Bernie Lombardi.
Yes.
Yes, he and I buddy read Diaz's debut, In the Distance, and I loved it so much.
I've heard that's great. I haven't read it yet, but
yeah,
he's an amazing writer.
It's not as structured quite in such a interesting, unusual way, but it's a powerful novel. Yeah, it's in my top 10 for sure. It might even be in my top 5. I haven't quite sorted that out yet, but yes. So I want to get on to Trust in due course. Number 3, You Can't See the Forest for what's your number 3 pick?
It's The Trees by Percival Everett. This was a novel that was longlisted for the Booker Prize. It is not a debut novel. He's written a number of novels, a lot, and he's been published a lot through Grey Wolf Press. It's a great independent publisher that does a lot of like really great authors. And people don't talk about Percival Everett enough. I've now read 3 of his books, and they're all amazing. He's such a good writer and so different. What happens in this book is that at the beginning, 2 FBI agents are sent to a small town in Mississippi because a white man has been killed. He has barbed wire wrapped around his neck, and his testicles have been cut off.
And they're in another dead man's hands or something, aren't they?
And then there's a black man who is also dead next to him holding the testicles.
Yes.
Then this happens again, that the black man's corpse disappears, but another white person is killed, and that same black person appears there. So it has this kind of like supernatural element where you're like, what is going on? It's these horrific murders, and it can get a little graphic, but at the same time, it's so funny, and it has such witty dialogue and such an interesting plot. I loved it.
Now, I'm not sure that I could deal with the violence. So have you read others by him that jam tart like me might get along with better? That isn't so violent?
I read Telephone, which was one of the nominees for the Pulitzer, I think the year before in 2021.
Okay. And it's not so.
No, it's not violent like that. And it deals with a professor, and I can't remember exactly, a professor who's trying to find out about his daughter's illness, who's like terminally ill and dealing with it. That book was interesting because there were 3 versions sold. And the only way you know that which version you got is because there's a compass on the front, and it points to different directions based on which novel. And the text is a little bit different in each one. It's so fascinating. I haven't gone through and read all of 3 versions, but the one I read was really good.
Okay, that's crazy. I love that. And what I've heard about Everett is that each and every one of the many, many books he's had published are completely different from all the other ones.
Yeah, I mean,
he just kind of reinvents the wheel each and every time in terms of
they're all different, and they're kind of almost genre stories, but told from a literary perspective. They all have the same sense of humor and witty dialogue and playful use of language, but they're completely different. You know, The Trees is kind of a horror novel, horror thriller procedural that's dealing with racism in America. And it will keep you guessing up until the last line.
And we should say, because I don't think it's necessarily obvious from his name, that Percival Everett is also a Black American writer. Yeah, how about your number 2? I think I've heard about this book from some very important personage in the bookish social media.
Yes, I believe we talked about this in a previous bite-sized book chat. This is The Town of Babylon by Alejandro Varela. This book is about a Latin American man who is returning to his hometown, named Babylon, and he's going to a reunion, and he reconnects with his high school bully. And at the same time, he's dealing with like his family and some health crisis is there. He follows up with a friend who has mental illness. So there's a lot of different things going on, but I thought this was just a beautiful book, and I really connected with it.
Yeah, you sure sold it to me at the time. And this is the one where it's a debut, and right?
Yes.
And this is the guy who is in public health or healthcare
Yes.
service. And there's a lot of that kind of a perspective, which I think is just fascinating for a novel.
Yeah, I was able to see him in San Francisco, and he talked about how he wrote this book to give light to public health issues. Yeah. He even goes around, and when he signs different books in bookstores, like even if he's not personalizing it, he'll put a different like health issue in each signed copy, so they're all kind of different. He addresses these issues from a public health perspective and how that affects minorities, people of color. In one of these sections, it's about like a Black family moving into a predominantly white part of town and how that affects health and mental health and different aspects of life that we don't often think of. So it's really good, but it's not clinical. It's a really good novel that just has layers.
Yeah, sounds fabulous. And now for another backlist. What's your number one pick, Ryan?
My number one pick was Another Country by James Baldwin. I've read a number of James Baldwin's books. This was one of his longest and often, I think, touted as his best. And I've been meaning to read it, and I just haven't. And so I finally did this year and started it and was hooked instantly. And I thought it was brilliant. I thought it's one of the best books ever written. People need to talk about it more. It's amazing.
1962, and I've read it twice, and I reread it a couple years ago as a buddy read. And yeah, it's just an incredibly powerful novel. I can just close my eyes and step back into it just like that. Like it's just really atmospheric and just engaging with all of the racial issues of not only its day, but our day. And the characters are just unforgettable, especially the main character. So powerful novel.
Yeah. It takes place in Greenwich Village in New York City in the late 50s, I think.
That's right.
Like 1959. It's this urban setting on the cusp of change. It deals with queer characters and different relationships between more bohemian types, but we didn't get the kind of counterculture of the 60s yet. Yeah. So it's just kind of a fascinating snapshot of that time in New York City with these like really great characters. The first section is about one of the characters. It ends in a pretty surprising way, which I was like, how is the book going to continue? And then it does, and it's brilliant. I really liked it.
Yeah. And it's tough. There's some really tough parts of the story that I think he just has Baldwin does a masterful job of showing in a really stark way that just invites so much reflection about, some of the most important stories are really tough. Yeah. Beautiful novel. Good choice.
Thank you.
Now, I have a serious question, or just to like to end this on a little bit of a serious, not serious, but I'm going to ask it in a flippant way, but I'm not really being flippant. But
okay.
Ryan, did you ever read books by white people?
I do. And I post my stats on Instagram every year. Like I keep track of everything I read, and I keep track of like different data points. And half of the books I read about are by white people.
Okay. But none of those made it in to your top 9, which is so interesting.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
It's
which I think is fantastic. So that's why I'm asking, because I'm a similar kind of reader as you.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to look at what we're reading and kind of examine it. And as white people, I think it's our responsibility to seek out people we wouldn't normally read. Publishers have long said, well, we don't publish books by non-white people because people don't read them. And that's just not true. It's also like, if it's not marketed the same, if it's not, sold the same way, if there's not opportunity, then there can't be. So there's kind of a systemic issue. All I can do as just a reader is to diversify my reading as much as possible. And every year I make it a point to read from different perspectives and point of views. And I'm shocked that I still read half the books I read are by white people. Like, it's not possible to like really escape it, even if I'm trying really hard, which is kind of upsetting to me. It shows the systemic racism and discrimination in the publishing industry and in media as well. Like, if people like us don't talk about the books that we read by people of color, then they just don't get the same level of attention, even if they're a Booker winner, they're or nominee, a Giller Prize winner. Like, some of these people you've never heard of, like Percival Everett, who's written 20 books or something. It's really tough. So I think it's on us as readers to try and seek out books we normally wouldn't and challenge ourselves.
Yes, and I asked it in a flippant way, and I make a flippant comment quite regularly on my channel, which is that white people can't write as well as people that aren't white. And I also say women write better than men. And I actually kind of believe it in a way, and in a kind of a way I do, but I like to put that out to people that might not have thought about the kind of issues you've just been talking about. And I think it's absolutely fabulous that of all the books you've read, these are your top 9, and there isn't a white guy especially in the mix. So
that's true.
Yay for change.
I mean, and all of these were so amazing. I mean, it's hard to argue that James Baldwin isn't one of the best writers in American literature. And why he isn't read and reread more often, I don't know. I've read Go Tell It on a Mountain and If Beale Street Could Talk. And I mean, these are amazing books. And then The Town of Babylon was a book that isn't about me. I don't have that perspective. I didn't grow up in the same way, but I really connected to it. It has like universal themes running through it that I think a lot of people can identify with. So
that's right. Absolutely. So Ryan, thank you for telling us about your top 9. I hope to get to as many of them as I can next year out of the 8 I haven't read. And we might have to do this again next year.
Okay, sounds good.